Thank you, Steve. And I doubly want to thank you because, to my mind, you're the first person in San Francisco, anyway, that has realized the importance of zero rating, or sponsored data is really the larger rubric for this. This here in my hand is the Open Internet Order from February of last year, February, March. Sponsored data represents a concerted attack on the Open Internet Order, and it is going to be very difficult to beat back. It's technically difficult. It is mired in a lot of the semantic uncertainties of this document, of the Open Internet Order. So, and it was something that wasn't really anticipated fully when they did this order. I'll get to that in a minute. I've got a lot to cover, but first let me say I work for the state of California. I represent you, the ratepayers of California, but I am here today in my individual capacity, and nothing I say should be attributed to the California Public Utilities Commission. I also want to pick up on what Jeffrey said about Bill of Rights. I am firmly of the opinion that at some point we need to start thinking in constitutional terms about internet access. Apparently they're doing that in Brazil. The German Constitutional Court recently ruled that the right of internet access is a constitutional right under their information freedom prong of their equivalent of the First Amendment. And I think we need to go there in this country. The Supreme Court back in the late 60s had the Red Lion decision, in which they stated that the right of access to information, to a wide variety of opinion and fact, is a constitutional right. Red Lion has been probably one of the most hotly debated cases over 30 or 40, 60 years, 50 years since then, because the media companies realized that this would fundamentally alter the way they do business. It would recognize communications network as an essential service, and it would also address the fundamental problem that telecom, that we are entrusting with our telecom networks, an essential public function, communication within society, to private actors. So it's the constitutional angle of this has serious ramifications. Okay, I want to step back and do a little history here. The concept of common carriage is the key, I think, to the sponsored data problem, and it was the key to the Internet Order. As some of you know, back in 2002, with the cable modem decision, the FCC decided that broadband was not a telecommunications service. Instead, it was this information service. There was the DNS and the routing, and it was all too complicated to be comprehended by the rubric telecommunications. But at the end of the day, broadband is transport, and transport is telecommunications. And so they were, in 2002, ignoring a long history that goes back really to the 16th and 17th century in England. The notion of common carriage for bridges, for ferries, even for inns and grain silos. Facilities that were essential bottleneck facilities. And the English government, the Crown, said, you, Mr. Ferry Operator, must take every passenger on equal terms across that river. You can't hold up and extort certain passengers for more money. Railroads. in this country. That was the battle in this country. There was widespread public disgust with powerful railroads in the 19th century that were seen as controlling the U.S. California economy and corrupting our politics. And there's two ways that that happened. I could read you, and I would like to, if we have more time, read you long passages or passages from this book, Railroaded, by Richard White, about how railroads would come into a small town, and let's say on the western slope of the Sierras, and essentially say, nice little lumber company you have there, be a shame if your lumber couldn't get to market. Or they would do this with farmers. There was a farmers' alliance that grew out of this. In fact, the progressive movement, in large part, was fueled by the misdeeds of the railroads, their attempt to squeeze small business operators. The other side of that abuse is described in this book by Ron Chernow called Titan, how Rockefeller and Standard Oil were able to get, because they were such a large buyer of railroad capacity, were able to get special rebates that put smaller refineries completely at a disadvantage. So the solution was to separate the railroad's operation of a business, of a transport business, a conduit business, from the freight that traveled over that conduit. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 required that railroad rates be reasonable and just, and that the railroads publicize shipping rates, tariffs, and prohibited rate discrimination. That was the key thing, that this rate discrimination that hurt small farmers and businesses. Shortly thereafter, we had the formation of the California Railroad Commission, now known as the California Public Utilities Commission. I see one of my colleagues in the audience. The Railroad Commission took its current form in 1911. It was renamed to be the Public Utilities Commission in 1945, and telecom was added to railroads along with energy, gas, and electricity, water. All of that is under the purview of the CPUC. At the turn of the century, the California Constitution read, "No discrimination in charges or facilities for transportation shall be made by any railroad." That was then extended to telecommunications. In fact, common carriage was the basis of the 20th century telephone system, a sharp divide between the telephone carrier and what they were carrying. Now, back in the day, when they were only carrying voice, this wasn't a big problem. But as soon as the telephone network began to carry data, large amounts of data, this became problematic. Nevertheless, even as late as the late 90s, we had the Computer II decision that said, no, you got to keep them separate. If you're running an information business, that has to be in a separate corporation or separate division, separate affiliate from your operation of the telephone network, the transport network. So all of this was worked just swell until 2002. The Bushies came in, made a beeline for the FCC, the obscure cable modem decision where they decided, no, we're gonna eliminate that separation between conduit and content. On the railroad, we had the bad things that happened that I discussed, both the railroad demanding extortionate rates and large customers demanding rebates. And in telco, we have similar bad things that started to happen when data started being carried. There was, I call them two generations. We had the stuff that led to the open internet order, which was really kind of simple blocking of this guy had a barbershop quartet group that he would share barbershops on quartets on a file sharing system, and Comcast seeded it with interruption signals. Bruce, you may know the exact terms of that, and caused that to not work because they didn't want the extra bytes that were bits, the data that was intended or that came along with file sharing. Madison River, a small telephone company, decided it wasn't going to allow over-the-top VoIP because it competed with the telephone company's own service. The famous Pearl Jam incident where the lead singer went on a political rant and the network that was carrying him cut it off, much like the cable television case that Steve and I were involved in back in the early 90s, where Viacom was censoring in San Francisco. Then we get to the eve of the FCC goes through multiple permutations. They can't get it right. They keep relying on this information service category, and that's not a strong legal basis. But on the eve of their promulgation of this, we had Comcast battle with Netflix. This marks a qualitatively new aspect of the fight for net neutrality, and it really brings up the fight between, or the conflict between conduit and content. This here, I put this little chart together last night. The companies on the right are called edge providers. You and the rest of the consuming public are on the left, and in the middle is the telecommunications carrier. I used AT&T here. We could put Comcast or Verizon in there, or Cox or Charter, whoever. And what Comcast did when they were in that middle seat is they demanded tribute from Netflix. Again, just like the railroads, be a shame if you couldn't get your videos to the end user. So this connection to the end user is called a terminating monopoly. If you are Netflix in California, the only way you're going to reach a Comcast customer is through Comcast. And Comcast at the back door there said, we're not going to connect you here unless you pay us extra. And eventually, Netflix caved and paid extra, and lo and behold, the next day, all of the latency and all the problems they had went away. It was a very clear case, I think, of some would call it extortion. Okay, so and this also represents the problem with sponsored data, which is a variation on this theme. The FCC has defined sponsored data as plans, sometimes called zero rating, which enable broadband providers to exclude certain edge providers from the end user's usage allowance. So this is a variation on a theme. So if Facebook and Netflix are bought into AT&T, they will be excluded from your data cap. And this is primarily mobile, but not necessarily. To the detriment of YouTube, just for instance, or The Nation magazine, or Wikipedia. So what the carriers want really is a vertically integrated business operation, the combination of conduit and content. Some people refer to that as the cable model. It is, I refer to it as an information mall or a theme park. It's a closed garden structure. This is, by the way, it's not a real ad, but was something cleverly put together for the net neutrality. But essentially, AT&T would sponsor, or these companies would sponsor data on AT&T's network. Oh, do you want to go back to that one? I don't even know how to go. Up key? Thank you. Good thing that someone knows what they're doing here. I'll send you this. In fact, I already did send it to you. Okay, so the Open Internet Order, real quick. Finally, I really think that Obama going on TV was the key thing here, because we had an FCC chairman who was very friendly with the industry, and Obama said, I want Title II, which in plain speak means I want you to classify broadband as a telecommunications service, as a utility. That was the key bit in the Open Internet Order. the rules apply to what they call broadband internet access service, and a key thing here, they apply also to wireless. This is not regulation of the internet. A lot of the Wall Street Journal is very fond of saying that the FCC is regulating the internet. They are regulating the underlying telecom substrate. They are regulating the wires. Anyway, just that needs to be clear. So the rules going forward, I'm going to go through this real quick. No blocking, no throttling, no paid prioritization, a general conduct rule, and an enhanced transparency rule. Actually, all of those could have application to zero rating or sponsored data, except for the no blocking. I really think that the no blocking was designed for those Generation 1 censorship that I talked about earlier, the Pearl Jam type incident. No throttling, we're getting close here. Any conduct that inhibits the delivery of particular conduct, apps, or services. I don't think it quite fits, but we're getting close. The exception would be reasonable network management. You can do what you need to make your network work well, but that has to be strictly from an operational perspective and not for money. So now we get to paid prioritization. This is as the name suggests, there's money involved here. Network management, reasonable network management does not apply because this is a business decision. If you're prioritizing some data over others as a business decision, I think this fits. But we'll discuss that a little bit later. There's controversy about, even among people who are pro-net neutrality, there's controversy about that, whether it fits. This is their catch-all, no unreasonable interference or disadvantage. The discrimination factor is figured in here. This is on a case-by-case basis. There's a reasonableness test. Lawyers love to hear that. Reasonableness means lots of work for lawyers down the road. The key elements they're going to be looking at: does it preserve end-user control? Is it application agnostic? Does it promote competition? I would argue that zero rating is inimical to competition among the edge providers. But the question of whether this covers data caps and sponsored data is still undecided. Okay, enhancements to the transparency rule. Very simply, this is you got to tell your customers what you're doing. This is a truth in advertising rule. What is reasonable network management? Again, we're in a case-by-case basis. Reasonable and appropriate to achieving a legitimate network management purpose, network architecture, specific nature of the network. Those are the kind of things that they look at. Now let's talk about sponsored data and zero rating. Some of these, and my core thesis here is that this mixes, again, content and conduit in a way that is antithetical to the whole notion of common carriage. Jeffrey talked about the free basics. Essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, Facebook has gone to primarily Indian wireless companies and said, we will subsidize your provision of mobile internet access as long as that access is limited to Facebook, WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook, and Wikipedia. I think those are the three. Maybe there's a couple more they throw in. And the rest of the world is off limits. And I just want, what's wrong with that? You know, who's against providing millions of millions of Indians free internet access? An open internet, this is Susan Crawford here, is more than anything else something that allows users to gather and speak to one another. But users of a walled garden or a zero-rated internet can't even click links that go outside the garden. And they certainly won't be launching their own apps. Linking and building are the fundamental attributes of the internet, innovation and speech without permission, and must not be compromised away. That, to me, hits the nail on the head. AT&T sponsored data, they go to those edge providers on the right and they say, if you want to be excluded from our data caps, pay up. Data perks is a new thing that AT&T has come out with. If you interact with their data, they'll give you credits for your data cap. So again, in all these various ways, mixing the transport with the content that's being transported. Verizon's toll-free data, it's actually called Freebie. Comcast Stream TV, they will allow you to see any of their curated set of programs without triggering your mobile data cap. And T-Mobile's Binge On. I actually think Binge On is the closest case of any of these because they are not, at least they say they're not, asking for money from the carriers or from the edge providers. They simply say, edge provider, if you optimize your service to fit our program, we'll exclude you from the data caps. But what they've also done is throttled everyone down. And that raises the disclosure, the transparency problems of the rule that we just spoke about. So what this means, again, the internet brought to you by our corporate sponsors. I couldn't believe that this vice president of Verizon was so clear and honest about this. The capabilities we've built into our network allow us to break down any byte that is carried across our network and have all or a portion of that sponsored. This is not the internet
including the FDA.
Is the FDA in there as one of the sponsors? But is it illegal? Okay, so there are various theories. The FCC in the open internet order did, at the last moment, insert a couple paragraphs saying, well, you know, we don't really know about the sponsored data. It does concern us, but we'll just watch and monitor the situation. They did say sponsored data plans have the potential to distort competition by allowing providers to pick and choose among content apps. So they realized the problem, but they didn't really do anything. So we're going to have to look to those rules and the interpretation of those rules now to decide whether these sponsored data plans are illegal under the open internet order. Do they violate the paid prioritization rule, the rule against paid prioritization? They talked about paid prioritization as the management of a network to favor some traffic over others, including what they call resource reservation. That phrase was not more narrowly defined in the open internet order, at least not that I've seen. Maybe.
I've seen.
What would your understanding of that be? It seems to me they're reserving space under the data cap is a form of resource reservation. Does it violate the unreasonable interference and disadvantage standard? It certainly is a discrimination of sorts among content and applications. Does it violate the bright line no throttling rule? It does inhibit a class of content. Marvin Amori wrote an essay in Slate saying that he thought it violated the throttling rule. And does it violate the transparency rule? Is it fully disclosed? Binge On certainly was not disclosed until EFF did its survey. So in closing, the future, big picture, say goodbye to the telephone network. This document, the Open Internet Order, defines the network in terms of broadband connectivity. Telephone service, voice service is just an app on the network. Connectivity is the essential service. In my view, it has to be neutral. It has to be transport only. I mean, the whole formation of social consensus depends on a neutral transport media. And that means conduit has to be separated from content. I'm just going to be a broken record on that. The regulator's role going forward is to police that and enforce that separation. That's going to be difficult because of the very arcane, detailed, technological aspect of a lot of these programs, as well as the semantic ambiguity in the Open Internet Order. The FCC did just put out data requests to T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon. I assume Comcast also got one of these letters saying, tell us about these programs. And so they're starting to build a record, so we will see. Thank you.